Hello. So it looks like NHS Fife has found another way of torturing Nurse Peggie for her cheek in calling out a transgender doctor who was still a man and trying to use the women's changing rooms. And at the same time, I'll be showing you how a Labour MP, in his very support of transgenderism, has actually proved Nurse Peggie's case. I'm Granniopteryx. I'm on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. So, the nurse who challenged a trans NHS doctor has now been threatened with the sack for misgendering him. And I don't know, somewhere down here, let's see, right here, the Telegraph chickens out and uses the pronoun them to refer to Dr. Upton. Meanwhile, Dr. Upton claimed Miss Peggie had subjected them to sustained transphobic harassment. This is total nonsense. And of course, it leaves you wondering what you're reading about by this case. Does that them now should grammatically refer to both Dr. Upton and Miss Peggie? The language is being degraded and wrecked by this sort of activity, and the Telegraph should not participate in that. But leaving that aside, I'll go through this article and then I'll show you how a Labour MP actually proves Miss Peggie's point. A nurse who challenged a trans doctor for using women's changing rooms is being threatened with the sack. At the centre of the allegation, which now threatens to ruin Miss Peggie's career, is that she misgendered Dr. Upton by using male pronouns, including when speaking to other NHS colleagues. So, in fact, she just referred to Dr. Upton, who is a man, as a man. OK. Following an internal investigation, separate to ongoing employment tribunal proceedings. So there's two things going on now. Dr. Upton is, there's a case involving Dr. Upton's complaints against Nurse Peggie. Nurse Peggie, it sounds like that's her first name, doesn't it? No, Peggie is her second name. Her first name is Sandy. It might be Alexandra or something, whatever. There's this case going on where Dr. Upton has a complaint against Nurse Peggie, and now NHS Fife are having a go at Nurse Peggie for the crime of misgendering. And they will say that Miss Peggie has compromised patient safety by refusing to work effectively with Dr. Upton. And I might point out that Dr. Upton is refusing to work effectively with Nurse Peggie by threatening her. And by threatening her, I mean invading a woman's only space while he is still physically a man. Her legal team has accused Dr. Upton of fabricating the two occasions in which she's accused of jeopardising patient safety. Apparently, Dr. Upton said that Nurse Peggie had been aggressive to him in the women's changing room when he was using that facility. Now, first of all, we have to ask how a woman could threaten a man in a one-to-one combat. That's just, with very few exceptions, not even possible. Miss Peggie insists they did not happen. And we have a man here who insists he is a woman. And I don't know why anyone would believe his word against Nurse Peggie's word when it came to another situation which he appears to be fantasising about. Dr. Upton had publicly accused the nurse of harassment. A senior MSP, member of the Scottish Parliament, said it was beyond belief that a nurse with 3 decades of experience was facing the sack for speaking out in defence of single-sex spaces. So Miss Peggie is believed to have been told by NHS Fife on the second day of her employment tribunal that potential outcomes from Friday's hearings include sanctions up to and including dismissal from her job. The nurse admitted... Oh, hang on, no, I've got to go back to this. In 10 days of evidence, a tribunal in Dundee was told that Miss Peggie had encountered Dr. Upton, who she believes to be male... I think that's probably beyond dispute, in female hospital changing rooms on 2 previous occasions before the Christmas Eve incident. The Christmas Eve incident was when she told him he wasn't supposed to be there, and he took offence at that. Miss Peggie said on the third incident, I suppose, she needed to use the changing rooms urgently due to heavy menstrual bleeding and felt intimidated and embarrassed to find Dr. Upton there. So she had a particularly embarrassing situation to deal with and found a man standing about in the changing room and watching her, obviously, while she was dealing with menstrual bleeding. The nurse admitted she'd called Dr. Upton a male, but denied she'd provoked an angry confrontation. Now, this is apparently what Dr. Upton said of her. She had behaved like a dog with a bone when making her views known. And that says a lot about Dr. Upton, doesn't it? How he regarded this nurse. A dog with a bone. I think that says a lot. OK, well, that is the case so far. So, NHS Fife are not only holding this tribunal, which was brought by Dr. Upton, they are now attacking her from the other side, which is disgraceful. And in case you're interested, Tess White, MSP, apparently she asked, so she's a member of the Scottish Parliament, she asked NHS Fife how much public money it has spent defending its gender policy in this particular case. And they refused to disclose the figure, not to just an ordinary member of the public, but to a member of the Scottish Parliament, which is absolutely... well, it's unbelievable. Well, it's not unbelievable, I suppose. Right, now I want to bring in a then member of the Conservative Party at a debate in the House of Commons. And this is what she said. This was, about 3 years ago, I suppose. I don't remember exactly when. It's not recent because she's now been voted out of office. And that's a shame because, well, you'll hear from the way she speaks that she was an asset to the House of Commons. All right, so let's just give Miriam Cates a little time to hear what she said about being confronted by a man in the women's toilets when she went to a restaurant.
Understand the threats to dignity and safety that this poses, because it will change the social contract. In this country, we recognise that in toilets and changing rooms, in public spaces, there are areas where only women are allowed. I had an experience recently in a restaurant where a man dressed as a woman walked into the toilets. I was on my own in the toilets. He stood behind me and stared at me into the mirror, looking at me in my eyes. Now, I have no idea if he intended me any harm, but...
Now, the fact is, he was staring at her in the mirror. He was standing behind her and staring at her in the mirror. She's a woman, he's a man. I don't care what he's wearing. That's a threatening situation. And I want you to remember that as she's saying that this is a threatening situation. I want you to remember that because I'm going into the reaction of a Labour MP to what she said. But let's just carry on with this for the moment.
But my instinct, my evolved instinct as a woman was to be frightened because unlike almost any other species, women are far less powerful than men. We can't defend ourselves. That's why we have... No, it's a fact. The difference in strength between men and women is phenomenal. That's why we have separate sex categories for sport. Women are evolved to be wary of men in intimate spaces. That's why we have single-sex spaces. They must continue to exist for the safety and privacy of women. This threatens that social contract. Finally, it threatens the understanding of...
OK, so that's what Miriam Cates said. And she carried on talking about gender self-ID and all the rest of it, and got this response from a Labour MP called Lloyd Russell Moyle. Actually, let's give him his own whole page because he deserves it.
That speech was probably one of the worst transphobic dog whistle speeches that I've heard in an awful long time. The idea of linking trans people with predators, frankly, is disgusting, and you should be ashamed.
Did you see the way he was stabbing his finger at her? I'm going to play that again because it's a prime example, but it gets worse, I promise you.
Goodness me, that speech was probably one of the worst transphobic dog whistle speeches that I've heard in an awful long time. The idea of linking trans people with predators, frankly, is disgusting, and you should be ashamed.
So, there we have what Russell Moyle said as Miriam Cates sat down. But then this happened. And now I can't find a video of it, but I do have some stills. On the left is a time-stamped picture from Parliamentary Live TV. Top right shows him sitting as close as possible to the SNP. What happened was, you see this seat here? I wonder if I can make this bigger. Oh, here we are. You see this seat here? He moved from the Labour benches to the Conservative bench. That's Russell, well, not to the Conservative bench, to a side bench, but it's right opposite. He was over here somewhere, and he moved here and sat down, and there's Miriam Cates. There he was in the Labour benches. And then he moved there. And what happened? She was on her own. And then he sat there and stared at her. Remember that man in the mirror? Well, he did the same thing. He stared at her. He sat there and he stared at her. And this MP, also a Conservative MP, who was sitting elsewhere, saw what was going on. And I wish I tried to find who it was before, but I couldn't find it. What a gentleman. He came over and sat next to her, effectively between her and Russell Moyle. Because he realised she needed, obviously Russell Moyle wasn't going to lean over the barrier and grab her by the throat, but just staring at her was intimidating. And Russell Moyle knew that. And this man decided to put himself in between so she would feel safer. And Russell Moyle knew that his presence so close to her, staring at her, was intimidatory. The very thing that he was telling her was disgusting in her speech, he was doing it to her. But there we have an example of the problem a woman has when there's a man in her space, in a space where she should feel safe. and Nurse Peggie, who was in a changing room, had nobody, no gentleman to come between her and this fellow who some might call a pervert, exposing himself or threatening to expose himself or being in a position to expose himself while she deals with intimate body parts of her own body. And NHS Fife are victimising her for all of this. And here we have a situation played out in real time between a so-called transphobe and a man who was supposed to be defending transgender individuals and was acting in exactly the same way and showing how bad the situation was. So bad that a colleague saw what was going on and came over to protect. Right. Well, there's the Nurse Peggie situation. And, as I say, we don't know how much money has been spent dealing with the situation as well. For the sort of money that has been spent, I think Fife NHS could have provided a separate changing room area. They could have built an extension onto their hospital to accommodate this transgender doctor. But no, they decided it was much better fun to have a go at a nurse. Disgraceful. Till next time, you can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.